Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are today. I am super excited to be talking with you about Suricata and network detections with Suricata. My name is Brandon DeVault. I am a senior security author and researcher here at Pluralsight. I'm also a part-time member of the Florida Air National Guard, where I do incident response and threat hunting. Today, I'm joined by the illustrious Josh Stroschein, Director of Training and Academic Outreach at OISF and professor at Dakota State University. Welcome, Josh. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for setting this up and inviting me and giving me to have an opportunity to talk about Suricata, all things Suricata, especially our course on the platform, and really I'm lucky because I get to show off all the cool things that the development team for Suricata has been working on now for years.
Awesome. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about OISF in just a minute. We're going to dive into a bit about Suricata, and then Josh is going to be demoing a lab, which should be super cool. But do you mind starting off with just giving us a little bit about your background for us?
I've been with OISF now as the Director of Training and Outreach. So anything that touches educational stuff, that's me. This will be my fourth year, I think. And then I was with the OISF about a year before that, just helping out on a kind of volunteer basis. As you mentioned, full-time at Dakota State University, I teach reverse engineering, malware analysis type stuff. I've been there about 8 years now, and just retired from the Iowa Air National Guard doing cyber defense with them. I guess I'm kind of happy to be on the other side of that fence finally. It felt like a long time coming, but it's been fun. Outside of that, Pluralsight author as well, and I do some, I guess, freelance work here and there, trainings and whatnot.
Perfect. Yeah, you can tell you're growing the post-military beard, so you're
Yeah.
doing it something right.
I
uh,
had to. I felt obligated. I think it was almost like a contract I signed when I got out. I will not shave for at least 6 months.
Fantastic. Okay, so Josh is absolutely going to be the focus of today's live stream, but before we dive into that, I wanted to spend just a minute and talk about this new partnership that we have and give a little background on both our organizations. I know we might have a little bit of two disparate groups coming together for this thing, so nice quick little overview might be helpful. So Pluralsight is a education and training platform. We provide a lot of videos, but we also have cert prep and assessments and hands-on lab content, which you're going to get to see a little bit of today. Now, despite there being a bit of a paywall that you might have to get through to get access to most of the content, Pluralsight and myself are super passionate about open source and community outreach. And so I get to spend a lot of time reaching out and engaging with the community as much as I can, which is part of the reason why I'm in front of you today. Um, and so with that, we try to push things out to GitHub and share resources through whatever we will. One of the things that we're also doing today is the lab. So most of the labs on the platform are restricted to the enterprise customers, and so if you convince your employer to buy a set of licenses, which would be awesome, you're going to get access to the hundreds of labs plus all the other things. But if you're a general user, you don't have access to really everything. But we are moving some of the labs to our what you might call freemium library, where if you've got a standard account or even just a trial account, you can sign up for that trial account, get through the lab, and get a little bit of hands-on practice to see kind of what that looks like. So that's Pluralsight in high-level overview, nutshell, if you will. Josh, you mind telling us a little bit about OISF?
Yes, OISF is the Open Information Security Foundation. A bit of a mouthful, but it is a 501(c)(3) that was established to support the Suricata project and does so. So it provides any donations, any financial assistance that we rely upon to keep the team together. That is actively working on the Suricata security monitoring tool. It's all goes through it all goes through OISF. So they provide the oversight, they provide the administration, any legal assistance that we may need, as well as hiring the folks that are working. We have some full-time and part-time developers, some contract workers, as well as a very active community. So there is a lot of opportunity to get involved far beyond taking on OISF as a part-time job. There's also some consortium memberships, and due to the license, while Suricata is open source, it is a GPL v2 or something. So using it in a commercial project does require some licensing. So the OISF provides the support to work through companies with that to make sure that everything is on the up and up.
Yeah, that's great. So this partnership, that's super exciting for me because that means I get to work with you more, which is super cool. But hopefully we can also provide a platform for hosting more secure or Suricata content. And if nothing else, helping to try and align more towards OISF and other open source community like goals, so we can try to find whatever content makes the most sense to provide to everybody who really wants it. Now, Suricata, kind of dancing around this a bit, but Suricata has been one of my favorite network intrusion analysis tools for many years. So talk a little bit about why you like the tool and why it's so awesome.
Oh boy, how much time do we have? Yes, I tell everyone whenever this conversation comes up, I'm biased. I work for OISF, and so everything to me is Suricata, Suricata, Suricata. There's a number of reasons. My plan to demonstrate as a handful of those, at least a handful of those today through the demonstration when we get to that. But performance is a big part. A lot of organizations are seeing massive amount of network traffic going through their network. So Suricata has the ability through hardware acceleration, through multi-threading, to really keep up. And there's some pretty substantial deployments that we're aware of out there where Suricata is keeping up. I think it's evolved beyond, there's still this perception of traditional IDS, IPS. You'll notice I try to avoid using those words, intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, generating alerts. While it certainly can do that, it also has a lot of other capabilities, protocol logs. So you'll get protocol logs for a lot of very popular and prevalent protocols: TCP, IP, HTTP, SMB, acronym soup. We can continue on. There's real-time file identification, real-time file extraction. There's the ability to create full packet captures, and those are probably the biggest features, biggest reasons off the top of my head. Easy to get installed, easy to get up and running, and documentation. I don't think we can overlook that. The documentation, while certainly you could say, well, it could use some work. It's pretty good. Anyone who's new to Suricata is going to be able to go to read the docs. They're going to be able to pull up the installation steps. They're going to be able to find binaries. You build from source if you're really feeling adventurous. Getting into the rule syntax, getting into the engine, getting into configuration. A lot of resources are there, and courses like this are really our goal with them is to help bridge that gap, to make that even easier to get started working with Suricata as a home user, as a hobbyist, as someone working in a large enterprise.
Yeah, I think I started, the military kind of put me and somebody else on this team and said, hey, go figure out security, build a stack of stuff. And so naturally we went towards open source stuff because it was free and we didn't have any money. And
Right.
and so I kind of fell into that trap you kind of talked about, like, Suricata is an IDS and that's what I'm going to use it for. But as I got more and more practice with it, I'm like, oh, it keeps track of like flow conversations and gives me protocol logs. And not to name any other products, but it does this thing called port independent protocol detection. So it can detect
Mm-hmm.
protocols regardless of what port they're operating on, which from a security perspective is super important to me. Yeah, so fantastic tool for performance, for scale, for just, I don't know. I ask myself all the time, like, how is this thing still free with being the best um, IDS slash also network analysis tool that I've kind of found. Okay, so we've talked a bit about Suricata. By the way, if you have any questions at all, we're gonna save a bit of time at the end for a bit of Q&A. So go ahead and ask those in chat or wherever the system that's up for that, and we'll absolutely get to those by the end. But we're going to dive into the super fun stuff now, where Josh is going to walk through a lab that he just published on the platform a couple weeks ago, Network Security Monitoring with Suricata. Again, we're adding that lab to the freemium library, so you can sign up for a trial, get access to the lab, and walk through kind of the same steps that he's going to be showing us through today, but coming from the author himself, which is kind of cool. So without further ado, take it away, Josh.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to start here by we're going to walk through just really start to finish. Take a look at the course, take a look at the lab, get into the lab environment. I didn't want to tempt the demo deities today, so I've got a video, so bear with me. The first thing you can see is the course, Network Security Monitoring with Suricata. So it is meant to be an introductory, getting started course that will introduce you to really all things Suricata, get you up and running, installation, and you'll see here we'll go through a few of the modules just to give you an idea. The great thing is there's also this follow-along lab. So the lab environment that Brandon was just mentioning, it's built to map to the course. So there'll be videos to watch, there'll be instructions to go along with it. So it really goes hand in hand. Another really cool thing about this course is that while I'm the author and I'm the voice to it, the entire OISF team contributed extensively to developing it. So I can't say it's just my course. Everyone had a role to play because there's a lot of capability that Suricata provides. So getting information from the developers themselves about how things work and how best to use Suricata, I think is really important. So a lot of effort went into this on kind of the back end. Here you can see the first module is the course introduction. I've mentioned the lab environment. So you have the lab environment that you'll see in a minute, click a couple links and you'll have a browser-based session. You can also download the VM. So if you'd like to have something that you can use in your own environment for learning, we still provide a link to the VM that we're using. It's not 100% the same, but you'll see it's very, very similar. So that's really what that first module is all about. Getting into the second module then, we call it Suricata Basics. And this provides, let's see, get that video, skip ahead. This provides just a brief introduction to network security monitoring, the principles of IDS, IPS, and taking it really beyond that. If you're not familiar, IDS, IPS, I've now used that more times than I said I would. Intrusion detection is more about monitoring and alerting. Having those protocol logs. Intrusion prevention is more about taking an active approach to blocking traffic. So that's really the idea behind the two. We'll have common operations and working with rule sets, because that's going to be one of the primary modes that folks are going to deploy this. They're going to want to put it out on a network and start seeing IDS alerts. So this gets you working with those. The next is core functions. So again, looking at the output that Suricata is generating. It's a JSON file, JavaScript object notation, very common, very popular, important because then you can take that file and ship it directly to a SIM like Elastic or Splunk, and it'll start processing that data, and voila, you can make dashboards and reports and do all of that great stuff with the data. So it's not just alert data; it's all the data, the protocol logs that we were talking about. We also get into the configuration file. It's very important with any tool. Suricata is no different. That as you're considering using it in a home lab, using it as a hobbyist, using it in enterprise, that it's configured for your environment. The next module, Suricata Enterprise Deployments. So there's a part of this that isn't in the lab, because in the lab we don't go through setting up the full Elastic stack, but this is what it's showing you, just to give you a foundational idea of now how you can take the Suricata output through that eve.json file, set up, in this case, Logstash, and then have Logstash ship that to an Elastic instance. There are great courses on Pluralsight for installing Elastic, for configuring Elastic, for doing all things Elastic. So didn't want to overlap on those courses. And then there's the course wrap-up. So that's about it. Any questions, Brandon? Otherwise, we'll jump into the lab.
Yeah, I think it's looking good.
Okay. So here you can see the lab, and for this demonstration here. Normally the first time you hit the lab page, there'll be a button in the upper right that'll say, launch the environment or bring me to the environment. I forget the exact terminology there. It takes a couple minutes in order for the environment to build and for you to be able to launch. So hit the easy button on that. You can see I do have the open environment now, so we're ready to go. The table of contents on the right, that's going to map to all those modules. So now you're going to see the challenges and the environment to go and practice those skills in this environment that we've created here. The main page here will have all of the steps. It'll have the first challenge is just getting you oriented with the lab environment, and then once you're done with that, you'll have the ability to, here you can see the first real hands-on module, which is the second module in the course layout, the course introduction. So here you'll have the link to the video, so you can watch that, you can follow along with it to understand really the full context of what we're trying to cover here. And then there's the steps, as well as any caveats. So as I mentioned, the system, the environment here on Pluralsight is a little bit different from the training VM that we originally created for it. So there's just a section there, the modifications, to let you know about that. Then we get into steps, and those steps are going to be just, here, do this step. This will help to reinforce this particular learning objective or thing we really want you to understand. And one of the really neat things about the environment here is the commands that you see in, I don't know, what would you call that, blue? Very easy to highlight that, copy and paste, and then you can paste those in the machines in the lab environment. So a couple of these commands get a little bit lengthy, and you don't have to worry about looking at one screen and typing it in another. Let's see. When you're ready to move on, I forget what I'm doing next here, so let's just jump ahead. Yeah.
I launch think the cool environment part there too. Sorry to jump in.
Yeah.
Is not only do you have kind of the steps as walked through the video, but you've also got, I can kind of see some extra information that's added in there for maybe like why you're running the command, and so some reference information to kind of understand it a little bit better. So there's like the video piece to it. You walk through, talk about it like that. I'm sure there's slides in there, and then the lab content's got the walkthrough steps with the commands. So it kind of ties that video learning straight into the hands-on piece, which is kind of cool. I think so, at least.
Yeah, it's almost another opportunity to explain the same concept, but try to do it from a slightly different approach. And so I think there's likely more little tidbits of knowledge and why are we doing this that you'll find in the lab along with the course. And I think that just kind of happens by nature as you're developing content like this. It's not a trick to get folks to come and do the lab, but it's just a different way of going through the steps and explaining it. So I definitely, we aspire to have the two pieces really provide a really complete getting started with Suricata experience. When you're ready to launch the environment, so we can click on the open environment link, and I'll do that right now. That'll launch the tab, should open a tab anyway, and you'll see there are, down at the bottom there are your connections. There's the Linux desktop and Ubuntu console. So as the author, we get to define what systems we need and build those out. Part of that process that you have to wait is because there's things happening in the background, such as taking a base image, installing Suricata, configuring it, putting the Pcaps. We're going to use a lot of Pcaps for the course, a file that contains network traffic that we're going to replay with Suricata. And so we also get to define then any number of systems that we need. So for this course, we needed 2 systems. The Ubuntu console is an Ubuntu server, and that means it has no graphical environment. In order to do some of the graphical or to use some of the graphical tools, we needed a desktop. So that's probably the main difference between the original kind of vision of that course VM and the application here in the lab environment. But I think it came together pretty seamlessly. You can click on either one of those connections. Once you've opened a connection, you'll see up above you've got that recent connections, and that Linux desktop is already there. So you could also click on that. But if something isn't open, go ahead, click the console and wait for guacamole. I don't know. I've never figured out how to properly pronounce that. But eventually you'll get your session here, and you've got the Elite Pluralsight banner and me typing some double equal signs. Now, again, we just have, I forgot to edit that out, sorry. So the thing I was messing around with there is I was trying to zoom in, and my keyboard shortcut wasn't working. So I thought, what's going on? And of course, if my keyboard shortcut isn't working, I go to the actual interface and try to zoom in. The console wouldn't let me zoom, so I think my browser zoomed in, but I eventually gave up on it. Here now you're just the Ubuntu user on the console, and if everything went as planned, we should have all of the necessary components: Suricata update, Evebox, the things that you'll learn about in the course, set up and running. I wanted to point out a couple of different aspects that we took in order to build this training environment. Right now, you're seeing output the command IP space A used to list the network interfaces on the system. Network interfaces, of course, allow that system to communicate over a network. There are two primary ones here. The second adapter, the ETH0, that's going to be the one that is normally used for the system to communicate out. The other one, listed as item 5, is dummy 0. That is a dummy interface, and it is designed so that we can actually replay traffic in real time against that interface to generate content, and it looks like it's all happening in real time as if you were actually monitoring network traffic using this VM. The other option would be to rely on replaying of Pcap, which in both scenarios we are, but Suricata can process Pcaps on its own. And when it does that, it relies on the timestamp from the Pcap, from when that traffic was originally captured. So if it's 6-month-old Pcap, all of the timestamps are going to be from 6 months ago. Replaying it to this dummy interface allows all of the timing to be recent, and it's also more like a real Suricata deployment in that it's running in service mode, it's monitoring an interface, and it's generating that data in real time. Okay, one of the first things to then also consider when getting into the material with the lab, and again, we go into quite a bit of detail in the course, is just how do we replay these Pcaps, as I was just talking about. So there's a couple of scripts that we have available, and you'll be able to dig into those scripts in the course. The first one, as you can see here, suri-replay-pcap.sh. So anyone who works with Suricata long enough eventually starts to call it Suri instead of Suricata. I suppose we just get tired of saying all of the syllables. But that replay script is going to replay that traffic against the interface. So Suricata is running in service mode, and it's listening as we're using TCP replay in order to replay that traffic. Again, there's a number of nuances, a number of differences that you'll learn about in the course as to why, how your interaction is going to differ then, whether you're relying on that Pcap replay or Suricata to ingest the Pcap. One of the reasons you might rely upon, you'll actually see this with a number of sandboxes, online sandboxes, any runs and the triages. They can, you can throw malware in a sandbox, capture the traffic, then take that traffic in Pcap form and run it through Suricata to then also get IDS alerts. So that is one good use amongst many for you utilizing that Pcap processing mode. Let's see here. Getting into the other console. So maybe that went a little fast, but just went back to that main lab page, and now I'm opening up that other system that we have for the lab environment. This is an Amazon Mate, I think is the base OS here. Really just need it for a browser. So you saw that, applications, Chromium browser, and what we're using this browser for is to access Evebox. And Evebox is a lightweight, I'm going to skip ahead here and pause at this moment. Evebox is a lightweight rule kind of Suricata data manager. I think if you looked at the project page, it'd say it's used to manage alerts, but you get access to pretty much all of the Suricata data through Evebox. It's now just in a web-based tool. It's all graphical. Here you can see that in the instructions, in order to point your browser to the Evebox service, then there's the command that you can highlight and paste. By default, it's going to listen on port 5636. And again, all of the services are running in that Ubuntu server. So the Evebox service is running there. It's listening to all of the data that's being generated by the Suricata service that's running. And because that's a server, we don't have a desktop environment. And I know you could probably do that through links or something, but that's not the experience we want with Evebox. So that's why we have the Linux desktop. Now, as we pull up the interface here, I'll just give it a second. I'm going to zoom in. You'll see that there is your primary view here is on the alerts. So Suricata is running in service mode. That means that as that traffic through that Pcap is being replayed, it's generating that data in real time. So I'm going to bounce over to the other tab in a minute. It's still replaying that Pcap, but because Suricata is in service mode, it's generating that data as it's being replayed to that interface. So we're starting to get these alerts. There may be more. It may be finished at this point. I don't remember exactly where we are in the traffic process. The inbox is then those alerts. As you can see here, alerts being, here we go. See, still waiting for that Pcap to finish playing. A side note on that replay process, because it is using TCP replay to replay the traffic, if your Pcap is 12 hours long, the default is to take 12 hours to replay it. In the script, we speed it up. So there's an argument that you can provide to TCP replay to tell it to go a little bit faster. But getting too fast causes issues. Of course, going too slow can take a long time. You're free to play with the speed when you're in the lab environment. You can modify that script to do whatever you want. But just a heads up. So back to Evebox, when we're looking at the inbox, then we have alerts. You'll have basic information, the signature, the message from that signature, the source and the destination, the timestamp. So you can see what this timestamp, or at least at the time that I recorded this, it was just a minute ago, because even though that Pcap was from probably a year, it's replaying it and now it looks like it's recent. So we don't have to worry about, normally in a situation where we're relying on the Pcap to be ingested by Suricata, we have to go over to the drop down and adjust the filter. So if that Pcap was a year old and we relied on that offline Pcap processing capability, then we'd have to come over here and adjust the time filter. Last week is the furthest this one goes out, so we'd have to select all. Similar if you had this integrated into an Elastic Stack or something, and you were looking at a data through some dashboards, you'd have to go into those dashboards and make sure that your time filters were adjusted properly.
I think one of the cool parts about this too, because you're kind of talking about it from the context of, how you made it work in the lab, but I've seen, at least through my own experience, where hey, sometimes I'm on incident response and I need to set up Suricata real quick and replay something through. And I don't actually care about the time. Other times I want it to preserve that timestamp because I'm correlating it into an Elastic search database or whatever else. And that part is important. And then I think you're going to get into command line a little bit versus Evebox, but there's lots of different options for viewing the same data, which I think you see a lot with some of these open source projects, but Suricata does it really, really cool. Anyway,
yeah. I'm gonna try to get to that as we go through the demo, and that there is a lot of modes that you can utilize Suricata in. That malware analysis example I was using earlier, incident response. I mean, that's another good, maybe just threat hunting. You work at an organization, you have a completely different rule set. Maybe it's your threat hunting rule set or whatever you want to call it, and you just go back and grab chunks of your network history, and you run them through Pcap with a different rule set just to see if anything interesting comes out, that you can discover something. So having Suricata, again, I've only really talked about it in service mode, but you can run Suricata as an instance to do the Pcap processing, which we'll do in a minute. And that can also be a really, really helpful thing. In fact, I typically install it in Remnix. So that way, whenever I'm dealing with some malware analysis, Remnix being a distro kind of like your Kali, it's got a lot of malware analysis tools already installed. So that way I can run those Pcaps and I can generate protocol logs or get alerts. Normally if I'm in like Remnix mode, if I want to look at protocols, I just use Wireshark. But if I want to see if there's any alerts in the traffic I'm investigating, because where alerts are valuable is they can help draw your attention to something. So that's usually the first thing I look for. What alerts come up, and is there anything I need to care about? If not, then I'll start digging into the traffic. With the inbox approach, this allows you here to take any of the alerts and then dive into them. So click on any one of them and you'll see that there is sections of data. Again, this is just a graphical wrapper around all of the data that Suricata is generating. So if you look to the eve.json file, you'll see all of this and probably even more. the top part here is information from the alert. So this particular alert, it was in regards to a TLS event. So TLS events are another record that Suricata will generate. So the rule syntax, so not only do you have that data in the eve.json, you also have, through the rule syntax, rule writers can then write rules to detect on patterns specifically in that TLS, whether it's part of the handshake, the session setup, the certificate information. You can look at the documentation to figure all that out. You'll have things like the protocol, the source, the des, so who's talking to who, what ports are we talking on. You'll have the signature, the category, the severity 1 being your red banner there. That means it's the most severe. Your signature ID, the unique signature ID, a unique ID to allow you to identify this signature. Below that, you'll have information about the relevant protocol, right? This is just the information associated with this alert. TLS, not a whole lot there. So we have things that Suricata will generate, like your JA3, JA3S hashes, as well as the original string values that were used to calculate those. The JA3s are just a way to take the limited amount of information that we have from a TLS session, put it in an order, that's the string value you see to the right, and then create a hash based off of that. And then that hash can be used as data that you generate, so you could search on it if you needed to. It can also be used in the rule syntax. Below that, you have this JSON output. So that's the appropriate record, the relevant record for this alert, and that's the full thing. So it's there in case you need it. You don't necessarily have to go digging directly into that raw JSON file. Going back up to the top, we'll before the end of this demonstration, we're going to take a look at signatures and the signature ID. But I'm going to copy and paste that. Now, the flow ID. So I just clicked on the flow ID. And what's interesting about the flow ID, I think, Brandon, you mentioned it when we started this, is that it does also keep track of flows. And it creates this thing called a flow ID, which allows you to, I think of it like taking a step back. I have this alert I'm trying to investigate. I want to see what else happened on that flow. So you click the flow ID, and now all of the relevant event records are going to be displayed for that flow. So this particular flow, we have our TLS event, we have 2 alerts. So not just the exploit kit suspicious get hacked TLS SNI request that we were just investigating, but then there's also a specific alert based off of the JA3 hash. And now you have the types, that type column that tells you each type of event that you can investigate. And any of these, just like the inbox that we were just at, you can click on it, you can drill into it and see additional information. Okay, as you're seeing here. That's the TLS event. Not a lot there, but on the rule side of things, and we don't get into a lot of the rules in the course. At least that's the goal for our next course. So maybe a bit of a teaser there, but it's a TLS event. So there's certainly things, everything that can be exposed to write rules is there and can be helpful, but it is very limited data.
And that's the distinct difference there too. I think what sets Suricata apart from being just, an IDS that alerts you on something. Okay, cool. So you get an alert that comes through, but naturally you then need to go figure out like what else this thing communicated with, or maybe it was, TLS, or maybe it was HTTP or DNS. Cool. Suricata also gave you protocol logs to that. So you can say, okay, based on that conversation or that flow ID, I can go check out the rest of the information that's going to be relevant to me as a security analyst, which is super powerful.
Yeah, you mentioned the go build an open source stack earlier. I think my time in the Guard, I probably went through a similar process, and open source was definitely the way to go. I can't stress enough. It's not just IDS alerts. You can save yourself some hassle. You can save yourself some resources. It's the data that is output with Suricata is very comparable to other protocol producing tools out there. So it's worth taking a look at. Maybe you can simplify your stack a little bit and save yourself some performance as well. Events, right? So like we're kind of, I could spend all day. I'm trying. Hopefully, I don't know too long. But there's a ton of data, and Evebox is here for you to just take a look at all of that data. That's why I said it probably is advertised as a rule, manager, not a rule manager, but an alert manager. But it really provides insight into all of the data. So here you can see events. You can select all the events, and now all of the events will be listed here. The timestamp, the type, who's talking to who, the description. You can click on any of those to investigate. You can click on the flow to then see all of the events related to that flow. Some DNS records. There's just a lot of data here. So as Brandon was just saying, it doesn't take a lot to go from that alert and start pivoting out. Or forget the alerts, right? Suricata can generate all this data. It doesn't have to have a rule set loaded. It doesn't have to generate any IDS alerts. It's still going to generate all of this data that it's seeing on your network. If we go moving on then to the third module, Suricata Basics. This is where we're going to take a look, I think, at the Pcap mode rather than that replay mode. So the other thing to consider here is just getting comfortable with services. Sometimes things need to be restarted. Sometimes we need to make sure that they're up and running. So just talking a little bit about using Systemctl to make sure services are up and running. Suricata is a service, and if you make changes to the configuration, there is a way to auto reload. There is a way to tell Suricata to not stop and reload as config. But if you do make a change, it has to be reloaded. And a simple way to do that is to restart the service, although you're going to lose visibility, not in a lab environment because that's no big deal, but in a production setting. The next command below that, and this is one of those that I'm really glad we can copy paste. That's just designed to get you working with the raw data. I think it's really important to understand what data is there and where to go and look for it. It's like, this is the truth of it. If you go look in the eve.json file, you're going to find all of the data. So if there was something that maybe was or wasn't in Evebox, well, maybe there is more data. And now all that data that you could expose in your analysis pipeline and your sensor pipeline, sending it to the SIM or whatever. You'll notice at the terminal here, we've got all the alerts that are being displayed. These are all of the same alerts that you see in the inbox now. It's just that once that replay was done, the script queries the eve.json file, much like we're about to do, and displays those in the terminal. So you don't necessarily have to bounce back and forth between the two. It looks like there may be more alerts here, but that's just because in the inbox there, it just grouped them together. So instead of showing you 5 of the same alert, it said, hey, this alert was triggered 5 times. So that's the main difference there, and just the number or the volume of alerts that you're seeing. Now I'm just going to paste in. So what this command is doing, and again, it looks really long. It is really long, but it's not terribly complicated. Just using grep to grep on the event type and specifying alert. So all those event types that we were just looking at from the eve.json file. So by default, Suricata running in service mode, var log suricata eve.json, piping that to JQ. JQ is a command line utility that you can use to filter and to pretty print JSON data. So all of those, kind of the rest of that JQ statement, that's just there to filter, to say I only want to look at these fields from the alert event type, those JSON records. And then of course you can modify that and really grep for any type of event and use JQ to then turn it into any data that you want to see. Yeah, there we go, highlighting that event type. Okay, same output as we previously saw, because again, that's the command that's in that eve.json, or in that script that we were just looking at. If you want to just look at the raw results, much like we saw in Evebox, pretty easy to do that as well. So really encourage you through the lab environment to explore the data, see what actually is out there and what Suricata is generating. So here you can see there's just the raw JSON. We're just using JQ to pretty print that output so that it's a little bit easier visually to understand what's available. Okay, this is just a real quick, let's take a look at that script. Again, we get into more of the details in the course. You'll see towards the bottom there, TCP replay. right? So Suricata is running in service mode. TCP replay is there to replay that Pcap, that network traffic, to that dummy interface at a speed of 4, a 4-time increase. So you can modify that if you'd like to. This is the other script, the ingest script. And what you'll see with this ingest script is we actually are invoking Suricata. So we're telling it to load, providing it the command line arguments, in particular -R. That is to tell Suricata to run in offline mode. So that's going to look for, the $1 is just our script, our bash variable, to take the Pcap path from the command line when we invoke the script. And that's telling it to tell Suricata to just load up, initialize, load the rule sets, do all the Suricata things, process the Pcap, and then be done. And then it ends, right? Versus service mode. -L tells it to use a custom log location for the pass, because it's also running in service mode. We don't want to have a resource contention issue, corrupt the log file. So we're going to use a different location. And then the last bit of that, -S, tells it to load a custom rules file. So there is a little bit of custom rules stuff that we'll do, and it'll load those files as well. So you have all the rules that your rule manager is configured to tell Suricata to utilize. We cover that in the course, but then also when we start developing custom rules. So this is a really good workflow for anyone that is providing custom rules, or for those that are getting into developing custom rules. Okay, here's an example then of running that script. Again, just a simple copy paste. You'll notice with the output now, we've got Suricata output because we're invoking it. So, say there's an error somewhere in the config, say there was a problem with a custom rule we wrote, anything, we're now going to see that. So that's why I said this makes for a better workflow when it comes to developing custom rules. In service mode, because we're not interacting with Suricata directly, we would have to tail or look at the log files that it's also generating, but we'd have to look at those in another terminal. Very similar though, once it's done, we'll have all of the same output files, the eve.json at that temp log location, and then all of the alerts, if any at all, were generated. And again, alerts are there if there's some alert to be generated. If there's not, there's still all of the protocol data and anything else that you told Suricata to generate. Now, normally, there we go. You could also use Evebox to look at this information. We don't have that set up here. You could use it in the VM that you download, but in the lab environment, because we're on the server, the Ubuntu server, we can't launch a local service and have a browser open to access it. So you can, though. Evebox has what's called a one-shot mode, in which you can point it to an eve.json file. It will launch an instance just to process that eve.json. You'll be able to open a browser. It'll tell you where to go in the output, and now you can look at all that same data. So you don't have to have Evebox running as a service as we do. You can have Evebox running in this one-shot mode to process one eve.json file. Otherwise, service mode is picking up those log files, constantly monitoring them as Suricata is generating them. Okay, here is an example then of writing a custom rule. And you'll see I'm going to highlight this rule. So this will come from our 4th module, and that we'll talk a little bit about those rule files and custom rules, and again, just getting more and more familiar with Suricata. So copied that rule, really basic rule, not a production rule. We're going into the custom.rules file. That'll be in the user's home directory. Again, all the instructions are there. And here we have, Brandon mentioned the protocol agnostic. I don't remember exactly the term you used, but what we're saying in this rule is alert. So that tells the engine to generate an alert. If we use the verb drop or reject, that would tell it to actually do that to that traffic if it's deployed in line. And deployment's a whole nother conversation, so don't worry about that if you're not real familiar. But we say, what protocol are we looking for? We're looking for ICMP. And now Suricata will find that regardless of what ports it's talking over. A really good example of that is HTTP. I don't have to say alert HTTP and then define a port like port 80. You just say alert HTTP, and any port that HTTP is being utilized over, Suricata will find it and apply your rule to it. So this is meant to be really simple, just alert on any ICMP traffic that you find in the Pcap that we're about to play. So that's just to get you into the rhythm of using using custom rules, writing custom rules, right? So with that, we'll use the ingest script. Oh, I failed to silence my device. We were talking about doing live things earlier, and I said I love it because it all just happens, and that happens. So there we go. Grabbing the Pcap now because I have a bunch of Pcaps in here, and we'll now run that script, and you'll see because it contains just a simple ICMP ping, Suricata is going to ingest that Pcap and apply our custom rule to it. Now, you'll notice that it takes a little bit of time here every time we invoke Suricata, and that's because we have the full emerging threats open rule set. And again, if you're not familiar with emerging threats, you'll have an opportunity to get familiar with that in the course. The emerging threats rule set contains 25 or 30,000 rules. And so what the engine is doing is not only is it parsing the config and everything else, initializing, getting ready to run, it's loading up a fairly large rule set. So that's why it takes a little bit of time. In service mode, it's already there, it's already running, so things happen a little bit quicker. It's just the speed of the Pcap replay. There you can see, there's our alert. Our alert was generated for our test rule, so that's pretty neat. And of course, if you get into writing custom rules, it can get more and more complex. It's often necessary to investigate rules. Part of this course is covering what we consider basic rule comprehension. And so that is, you see the alert message, but what is it really telling you? Oftentimes you have to actually look at the rule itself to understand what's there. And the default rules file is varlib suricata rules suricata.rules. So if you take that signature ID and you look for that rule file, or you look for that ID in the rules file, you'll get just the rule. And now you can see all the syntax here. So we don't get into all of the details, all of the syntax, all of the keywords in the course, but we start setting that stage so that you have an understanding of the role they play, and that, yeah, at some point in working with an IDS, IPS, whatever, NSM, like Suricata, you probably will have to pick up some rule comprehension, even if you don't have ambitions to become a rule writer. Let's see, so just grepping on that rule ID. The rule I wrote custom, you define your own signature ID, so I didn't do anything. I gave it a signature ID of 1. So here's just another example, grabbing that signature ID, going back to grep, replacing the value. Now you might say, well, grepping a rules file isn't very fun. Yeah, that's probably a true statement, but there's just no way to look at the rule syntax in Evebox. So this is just one quick and easy way. And again, I really like to focus on understanding the fundamentals. Let's not, a lot of times Suricata is part of a stack, and so you don't get the opportunity to really understand how Suricata is configured, how it's operating, what data it's providing. You just see an IDS alert and a dashboard. And so this is hopefully helping to better understand all of the pieces that go into it. The last section here, I didn't have any demos. It just gets into file extraction. As I was putting this, thinking through what I wanted to demonstrate today, I thought, well, I don't want to do the whole course. So file extraction is definitely a part of it. There's actually 2 components. It's file identification. So you'll see file info event records, which will tell you about files on the wire, and it will generate things like hashes for those files. And then there's file extraction. And file extraction allows you then to extract those files on the wire based off of things like the file magic, the lib magic, the file extension. The last module is a free-for-all. Right? You get time in the lab environment to just practice anything that we covered here. There's a bunch of Pcaps. I think the last thing I demonstrate is the folder. There's a folder from the user's home directory called Pcaps. There's a bunch of Pcaps in here that you can just write rules, investigate the traffic, look at the different data that Suricata is generating. And that's, because you said I had about a half hour, that's an introduction to the lab and the course, and maybe just a tad over a half hour.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And that last point you made there is super important too. We try with all the labs to, give clear instructions for, hey, these are the learning objectives we'd really like you to do. And this one follows a video course, so it's kind of easy to just match up with that. But it's also a fully robust lab, right? These aren't limited boxes. You have full deployment of Suricata. We've got extra Pcaps in there that you can kind of play around with based on those new skills that you just learned. And that's really how all the labs are designed, is to provide the learning path and also give you that free open space to play around with and learn.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, break things, change, make modifications. It's a test environment. The only it won't have access to the internet. That's the only maybe the only challenge. But we designed it knowing that that was the case. So everything should be there, and you should be able to use it, just like you would downloading the training VM or trying to set it up in your own home lab environment. So really makes it easy. Really makes it easy to get up and running. And I would say, although the lab is designed to be complementary to the course, you really can go through the lab on its own. I mean, the instructions are there to help understand and get moving. It's just the course is going to fill in a lot more of that background knowledge, kind of like what we did today in this webinar.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Okay, I think that brings us pretty much to the end. We are going to shift into any questions. If you've got questions, I think I saw at least one come through. And then I've got some bonus saved up questions if nobody talks. So
Okay.
fun stuff for Josh. But I did see the first one come through. How does Pluralsight work with open source tools like, I think they mentioned Zeek first and then Suricata. And so wanted to talk a little bit about our process for how we build some of our training. On one side, we have a full set of red team tools and blue team tools courses. And those are really high level short form courses that kind of get you from, I don't really know much or anything about this tool to, okay, I understand its capabilities and I understand how to operate it at a very fundamental and core level. Separate from that, most of our focus goes into methodology for how you operate as a security analyst, as an incident responder, threat hunter, malware analyst, red team operator, whatever that role may be. It's supposed to be focused on, hey, how do we teach you those methodologies in the best way to make you effective, regardless of what tools you may be using in your enterprise or within your environment, whatever it may be. Now, Suricata and a few others like Elasticsearch or Splunk, because they're so widely used and because the demand is kind of out there for more training, we build full paths on, hey, not just the short form, how to use the tool course, but we're actually going to invest a lot more into this for this is how to use the tool. Here's how to configure it with Suricata. Here's how to do rule writing, which is going to be super cool. And gives you a much larger path if that tool is a core focus for what you do day to day. And I don't think I mentioned it before, but most of our authors are actually external authors. So they're people that are currently working in the field that come in, we contract them to, not steal, but take that knowledge and put it up onto the platform so that you're not, so you kind of get a wide breadth of knowledge in a lot of these courses. Hopefully that answers that question. I'm still watching for any other questions that come through, but for lack of anything right now, I'm gonna toss one at Josh. So what if someone wants to get started in contributing to open source, contributing to Suricata, or engage with OISF? What recommendation might you give to them?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing is just to go to our forums, forum.suricata.io, and there's a number of different channels that are available and set up and very active. Find a channel that represents something you're interested in, whether that's developing and getting started and contributing to the project through development. If it's an idea, you certainly can go there, talk about ideas. There's channels for, hey, I need help installing, I need help setting up, I need help with rules. Why is this rule doing this? Or this seems like a false positive, can we fix it? Suricata doesn't, I mentioned the emerging threats Proofpoint, they produce the biggest rule set. So Suricata doesn't we don't have anybody that writes rules and produces a rule set, but because they tend to go hand in hand, we do see a lot of that crossover talk on our community forums. And a lot of folks from Proofpoint, for example, they're a part of the forums as well. So they're looking for those answers and monitoring that. So that would be one of the probably the easiest places. If you happen to be, looking to go to Suricon, Suricon's our annual user conference. It goes back and forth between Europe and North America. So this last fall we were in Boston, which means we're headed to Europe, and this next fall we'll be in Athens, Greece. And so that would be another great opportunity, maybe a bit more cost associated with that, but to come and just meet the team and start, getting to interact with folks and have someone that then personally help you, kind of guide you into where to get started. A lot of Suricata's capabilities have come from the community and not just ideas. Part of Suricon is day 3 of the conference is just the community forum where community members come and talk about, where should Suricata be going and what features does it need and where are things maybe missing. And then developing it, actually writing code and contributing to the project. So there's a lot of great ways. If you're interested in being a trainer, we could certainly use some help there. So reach out to me, reach out to anybody that you can get a hold of through social media, and be happy to talk about it.
Yeah, perfect. And thank you for bringing up Suricon too. I think that is the perfect justification to get your employer to send you to Athens, Greece. But that's just me at least. Well, cool. I think we're coming up on the end. I don't see any other questions. We've got about 3 minutes left, but shy of any last minute stuff coming through. As always, please reach out if you've got further questions after this. Maybe you're watching the video later on and you're curious about OISF, Suricata, curious about Pluralsight. We're active and available. I absolutely want to give back to the community any way that we can. So that's all I have. Thank you, Josh, so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure for sure.
Yes, same here, Brandon. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank Pluralsight for the opportunity. It's been an exciting partnership. Excited to see the content. The lab just launched maybe two or 3 weeks ago. So really excited to see that out there. Anyone who has ideas, comments, please use the discussion in the course in the lab. Provide that feedback for us, and looking forward to fingers crossed getting another course up here in the next few months.
Awesome. Thank you.